What is going on, YouTube? Gabmus here, and Michael. I'm joined by Michael Tunnell from TuxDigital. Say hi, Michael.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. Today we're here with Michael to speak about distributions, Linux distributions, and why there are so many distros out there. If you didn't know, Michael is the creator behind the TuxDigital YouTube channel, website. I think you have a pretty active website, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely active. It's more so active with the This Week in Linux podcast, but I also do a bunch of other stuff as well as Destination Linux podcast. But I also do extra content and I plan to write articles as well. But for the most part, it's just the podcasting.
Yeah, because you're practically all the workforce behind the Destination Linux podcast as of right now.
I'm one of the two main people who do the workhorse stuff. But me and Ryan are like heavily the ones, but the other two hosts are also very important. It's just as far as like the technical aspects of like editing and preparing the show, that's me and Ryan.
As I said before, today we're here to talk about distributions. And the first question that comes to a user's mind when they first approach the free software, the open source world is, so where do I download the Linux? Why isn't there a Linux that I can just download? What's the official one? What's the one I should be using? And it's fairly complicated to explain to them that there is no one singular Linux distribution, but there are actually many different distros to choose out there. So first thing, I wanted to clarify why there are so many distros out there, and why is it that we don't have just a mainstream, a more like default one compared to other operating systems?
Well, why is like what is exactly what the distros are, or why is there like fragmentation?
First, okay, right. First thing, we should actually say what distributions are.
Yeah, sure. So the distribution with Linux is it's basically just an operating system built on Linux, but because Linux is not necessarily intended to be its own operating system, a lot of people have different interpretations of what would make the best Linux-based operating system. So, and because of that, there's a lot of different systems that are created based on the preferences of the developers who make them, and those are the ones that are called distros or distributions.
It's basically a function of being open source. Linux offers the possibility to really do whatever on top of it. And many people actually in history created their own distributions to reflect on their vision for a computer operating system. And that created the very well-known fragmentation problem. Or is it a problem, actually? I don't think it is 100%.
It's a pro and a con. It's a good and a bad thing. So you get benefits of having people's different ideas and innovations that create all kinds of different really cool tools and features for various different distros, and also different ways of making distros. But at the same time, because of that fragmentation, it is kind of confusing for people who first get started. So like it's 50-50.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. The most important thing for me about the advantages of fragmentation is really that you have a lot of choice. Particularly if you're a professional and you using Linux in different fields and different for different needs, you really have a lot of choice and a lot of specific options depending on what you need to do. And actually, I think that defining some use profiles helps to understand the good parts of fragmentation. So I actually have defined a little bit of a list of different user profiles, depending on on how that particular computer is used. And I'm using the word computer very specifically here because I'm referring to both PCs and servers and any other computing device in general. So there are actually, as a consumer, there are quite a few use cases like gaming, content creation, programming, maybe art and design, and the typical office work or the stuff that your grandma does with her PC. And then we have all the other more technical stuff like server, embedded slash IoT devices, and appliance.
There's distributions that are specifically for scientific experiments and running data like back and forth with that kind of content.
And depending on which profile you're working with, you probably need to go with one distribution or the other. First thing I really wanted to address, like the more mainstream user needs. So as for mainstream distributions, there are quite a few. Probably the most well known are Ubuntu and Linux Mint. What do you think of those?
Yeah, I would agree that those are definitely the most popular. Ubuntu by far, like multiple magnitudes, at least. A greater as far as known and everything. So when people, most of the time, if they've ever heard of Linux, they've heard of Ubuntu in that context and nothing else. So more than likely, the Ubuntu is the most popular. But I think that those are definitely the most popular as far as also the most user friendly to get started with. And Mint is probably the one of the best options for people who are looking for an easy to use distribution, but also has like a Windows familiarity as far as the UX goes.
Yeah, and that's basically the most important thing that differentiates Mint from other distros. They actually went ahead and created their own desktop environment. I mean, back in the pre-Unity days, Mint actually made their own spin of GNOME too, using like different applets that they created, menus. I remember the Mint menu. That is still the paradigm of the Mint menu is still kind of there in Cinnamon and even their Mate implementation. So they always try to create that more Windows user friendly user interface.
Yeah, for sure. And they kind of distilled the same thing with the Mate implementation that they do, where they built their own desktop with Cinnamon, but at the same time they kept the long term usage of Mate when it's for like the GNOME 2 stuff. So if you preferred Mint back in the day, you'd still be able to do it with the Mate version. But it is interesting that they decided to make their own DE, because there's a couple distributions that decided to make their own DE, and they do it in different ways. But I think that the approach that Cinnamon has is really interesting, and I think it's a really cool idea to do a really, really polished Windows environment, because it's a good way for. I mean, I don't personally want to use a Windows layout. It's an interesting thing because I don't necessarily like Cinnamon as far as my personal usage, because I don't really like the Windows layout. But the Windows layout is very important for people who are transitioning from Windows, because maybe it wouldn't be great for a lot of people, but without the actual, like, the fragmentation aspects of the different distros, we wouldn't really have something like that, because if we all had to agree on which one is the best option, the interface might not be something that people are familiar with. So having something that's like Mint, that has that UX or that user experience layout of Windows familiarity, is a bonus for people who are wanting a more gradual step into Linux.
Yeah, exactly. And at the same time, this is like one of the best examples of how fragmentation can be good for a final user. And at the same time, it leaves like space for other distros or other developers to innovate and make something really different. Like, for instance, for what Ubuntu did with Unity, and also what GNOME did with GNOME Shell, that many people hated at the time and still do hate it. But they really had the possibility to innovate and create something that has its own brand identity in a way, and that's actually, in my opinion, it's kind of important as well, because I don't think that for an operating system or for any brand really that it's a good idea to leave as oh, that's the thing that looks like this other thing. Like it's not that good for like Mint to be the distribution that looks like a Windows clone. people were saying kind of the same thing in a way of elementary OS, and they're trying to move away from that image of themselves. But that's a risk when you're trying to like when you're not innovating, when you're not differentiating. You're always putting yourself in the position to be compared with the more mainstream solutions, if you will.
Oh yeah, totally. You're going to have a situation where you're going to have like this without the fragmentation. There's really the innovative is going to be locked, so you're going to only be competing with the ones that are already known. So people are going to expect, and sometimes people will look at it as a clone in the sense of a negativity of like I don't want it. Like there's some people who have switched from Windows because they're so frustrated and annoyed with Windows that they don't want it to look like that. So going to something that looks like it would be a negative to them. So having all these different options is actually really good, even if at the same time it does create some confusion about what choices there are. So like, I mean, it's definitely there's both pros and cons to doing it. And I think that it's better to have the choices than to not have the choices.
Exactly. That's really the point here. The choice finally is what differentiates the whole free software ecosystem, really, because you have so much choice. You can really choose whatever fits you the best, or whatever fits your particular purpose. But there are also problems with these distributions being so mainstream that they're basically the go-to solution for new users. There's been some discussions about Ubuntu in particular, and using newer hardware, and particularly for gaming, when using AMD GPUs. Since AMD started working on their open source AMD GPU drivers, they're actually built into the kernel. Having the latest kernel and having the latest Mesa and the latest packages has been kind of important for many users, and especially gamers or content creators. And the big problem with Ubuntu, and consequentially with all of its derivatives, is that it's not easy to get the latest software. Most of the time, you have to jump through some hoops to, particularly to get latest kernels. And since they're not really officially supported, most of the time they also bring some instabilities, or makes things a little bit more delicate, to the point that the whole system could break any moment.
I don't disagree in completely. But I do think that to say that it would break just for doing the new kernels, I think that's not necessarily accurate anymore because of the new hardware enablement stack. With like the 1804 release, or 1804.2, they set up the hardware enablement stack for like by default, so you can actually get the same kernel that's in 1810 into 1804, which is also going to be true for the 1904 release. So it would potentially, like if we would have had this conversation a year ago, the answer would have been completely installing a new kernel could create some big issues. So if you had a new hardware, maybe not the best option to use Ubuntu LTS. But at this point, it might be because of the hardware enablement stack, and the issue of just we're not really sure when they're going to release the update for the kernel from 1904 into 1804. But if they do, and if they do include the 5.0, it is kind of a game changer in that sense, because it allows you to have all the latest hardware for AMD and those kinds of newer, like cutting edge equipment inside of an LTS release. So if that does happen, it would be a big difference.
Yeah, I mean, the hardware enablement stack has been a very important move, in my opinion, from Canonical, and it's definitely making things better. But at the same time, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it like the old kernel, but with some backports?
No, they have the newer kernels. So, like for example, the 1810 has the 1804 started with 4.15, and the 1810 kernel was 4.18. The kernel in 1904 is 5.0. So what they're saying is that they're going to have some kind of backports when they do updates and security patches and things like that from the newer versions. But the idea is to be able to port the 5.0 into the 1804 stack.
So
like
if
kind
you
of just
install from
replace it in.
scratch, so if you install from scratch, you have the newer kernel. But if you update and if you installed 1804 in April 2018 and you update, you still have the old kernel.
No, you can 1804.2 enabled the hardware enablement stack by default. So as long as you did the upgrade to that version, you will get the new kernel. But if you chose to not do that process, then yeah, you wouldn't get the kernel. But if you get it by if you start from scratch now, you will definitely get the update. If you installed it previously and you just run the update to in the full upgrade of the entire LTS, it will come with that stack improvement too.
Okay, okay. Well, that's actually really nice, but still, it doesn't solve the problem that when new hardware comes out, it takes quite some
It
time
does
for
take a while.
yeah for Ubuntu in particular to catch up, and in a way, that's part of how maybe that's part of how Debian works in a way. I'm not. I don't want to blame Debian really here, but really, it's kind of a function of how long it takes to implement all the Ubuntu patches, because actually Ubuntu maintains their own kernel kind of patch
Mhm.
set on top of the Torvalds tree, and it takes time to test everything out and to package everything and make it available right on the repository. So it's
I mean,
probably
you're right in the sense that it's going to have an issue of, it taking a long time, and not well in the terms of computers a long time, because it's going to be like 6 months before you get a full kernel update. So, for example, the Radeon 7 came out a couple months ago, and we have to wait until the newest version of Ubuntu releases, and then wait until that version's kernel goes into the Ubuntu LTS version, as well as the Mesa drivers, because those are needed too. So you have to wait for that, which could be anywhere between a couple months to 6 months, depending on when that new hardware comes out. And I do agree that that is unfortunate, and it does take a while for that to happen. But for the most part, it's getting a lot better than it used to be. So like the last
yeah, for
year, you
sure.
could argue that it wouldn't happen at all, and now it's there's a lot of potential. So maybe they'll improve the speed of their releasing. I don't know, but at the moment, I do think it's an improvement. But I do agree that it does take a little bit of time, and you do have to wait if you're going to have like the latest and greatest hardware.
Yeah, and I mean, so probably Ubuntu at this point isn't like the best choice for people that are on bleeding edge hardware, and people that often change their hardware, their graphics card or CPUs, maybe even.
Yeah, for
And
people who
that's
are like
why
the early adopters, oh yeah,
exactly.
Ubuntu LTS or Ubuntu in general is probably not the best, because you're gonna have to every 6 months you have to upgrade and just hope that you get better support. But if you have like a kernel that updates much more quickly, you have a lot better experience.
And so for those people, for those early adopters and people who want like the latest and greatest hardware and that can afford it, of course, what do you think is a better choice of a distribution?
Well, it depends. I mean, there's so many different options that are good for that purpose, but there's also depends on like what kind of stuff they want to do with it. So, for example, Pop! OS is really good because you have the benefit of they give you the different NVIDIA versus AMD users, so you can have different ISOs for that, so that you get better updates and they do the update for the kernels and makes the graphics drivers easier to get. But they're still not as up to date as other distributions like rolling releases. So
Exactly.
like there's like so in a way it's really hard to say, but I'd say if you're like the early adopter and you want the absolute best support you can possibly get for your hardware, then a rolling release is going to be the only option. But at the same time, if you're a beginner to Linux, not really a good option. So you're going to have to compromise in some way if you are an early adopter for the hardware.
You know what? The thing about rolling release and what's the opposite of that? I mean, scheduled release, something like that.
Uh, there's a
Version.
technically speaking, the word stable has nothing to do with the stability of a system. That is
Yeah.
the word for a stable release, meaning that it's not going to change much. But people use the word stable in the sense of stability because that's the most common expectation of what that
Maybe a
word means.
version distribution, maybe a version operating system is a better definition. Maybe
I like to call it static.
static. Okay, that works too.
Yeah.
So there is like this dichotomy because, in my opinion, if you could have like a rock solid rolling release distribution, that would be the best choice. The problem is that rolling release is inherently kind of weird. Most of the time you're updating like if you're updating just like normal packages, that's in all distros, that doesn't cause a lot of trouble usually. But if you're updating like your desktop environment or your kernel, and you have a bunch of kernel modules to go along with that, and I don't know, maybe something else that is mission critical and that depends on a very like stable or static system, then you're gonna have problems. Like for instance, I use Arch, by the way, and I often find myself when there are changes in the upgrades in the desktop environment. Like recently, I upgraded to GNOME 3.32, and I had a bunch of extensions that just stopped working, and that's kind of expected in a way because when you upgrade your desktop environment, the extensions need to catch up with the desktop environment. But at the same time, this wouldn't have happened on a static distribution. So that's kind of the problems with rolling releases, in my opinion. But at the same time, they're so convenient because you just have to do normal updates, and you always have the latest software stack that you can get. I mean, is there a way, in your opinion, to have like the best of both worlds?
Not really. We're getting closer to that because we're working on the whole universal app format structure that the community is doing, and those are going to change a lot of like the necessity for people. Although I would say that it depends on, like, as far as like the hardware goes, you're really not going to be able to avoid having massive updates to the kernel. But in the sense of like actually there's regular users who just want to have like whatever support they already have, then I would say the universal formats are going to change whether you need to have a static or a rolling in many, many ways. So I think that we are still at a point where it's kind of like a middle ground, but we're pushing really quickly forward towards the point where we don't actually have to worry about whether you have a static or a rolling. You can still get all the software you want.
Yeah, I
But
mean
as
that.
far as the hardware goes,
Yeah, I mean that works for like I don't have a word for it, but like simple software, applications, apps, so to speak. But it doesn't really work for lower level packages like the kernel or Mesa.
yeah.
That's the main problem here we're talking about. So I wanted to actually share a one answer for a particular use case for the distribution. So I think that the first category, gaming, if you are a gamer, you have two choices here. I'd say it's either Pop! OS or some form of Arch based distro. What do you think? Do you agree with me?
I would say that if you're a gamer and you need the absolute best hardware or like the latest drivers, so like if you have a hard piece of hardware like I do, which is the Vega 64, which is not the latest version, it's the one right before, you're going to have support pretty good even in the LTS release. So like 1804 has good support for the Vega 64. If you have the Radeon 7, which is the brand new version, or the 2080, then yeah, you're going to need a rolling release or something that updates the drivers really quickly. So, and I'd say it depends, like in the sense of gaming. If you have the absolute latest early adopter hardware, then with gaming, you definitely need Pop! OS or something like Manjaro or Interrogos or Arca Linux or something like that, where it does have rolling support. But if you don't have the latest and greatest, you could kind of get away with something else. And in that case, really anything, because if you already have support for your hardware, you don't really need to get the newest kernels to get, you probably have good support anyway.
Yeah, that's true. But you can get better performance usually if you have the latest kernel in Mesa on AMD. That's historically been kind of true.
That's
Right?
true. I mean, it's definitely true especially with AMD users. You can get the newer hardware and newer Mesa. You get better support, better performance, but it depends on like how much performance you have and how long someone has used Linux. So, like, as far as gamers go, I'm very hesitant. Actually, anyone, doesn't matter if they're a gamer or not. I'm very hesitant to suggest anyone use Arch or anything based on Arch if they've never used Linux before in the first place.
Okay, that's fair. That's more like it. But is it? Because I what I found in my personal experience is that really, if you're trying to get out of track in a way, if you're using something like Ubuntu, it's very easy to break it, especially if you go down the path of PPAs and stuff like that. I remember back in the day when I used Ubuntu, I always added the Xorg address PPA, and that always broke my system at some point in a way or another.
Yeah, okay, there's certain aspects where that's fair, but I'd also have to say that you're not the average user. So when
I
you have
was.
when you well, when you were if you're in setting up Xorg, that is not an average user. Like
Well,
you
no.
don't. Most people don't have to do with any of that.
I remember it was when I was still like a Linux newbie, so any newbie could like do what I did because the Xorg address was a PPA that like had a newer version of both Xorg and NVIDIA drivers and there's something else related to
Mhm.
Xorg. And there were many articles out there that suggested to use this PPA, and there are
So what
still
was
some
when was
articles.
this? When did this happen? Like how many years ago was that?
I don't know, 12 to 20,
There you go.
2012.
Okay, there you go. There's all I wanted to. It was more than a decade. More than a decade. I wouldn't have even like suggested a lot of people even try it. And it's like if you had, you know, like early adopter hardware a decade ago, you're like there's no chance that you'd have any ability to use the hardware in Linux for a while. So like I mean, AMD ignored Linux for like an entire decade, and they only
Yeah.
recently, about 4 or 5 years, have actually been like the choice for Linux users because they embraced open source and everything. So before then, AMD would have been like, no, don't even bother. So I think that back then, absolutely, there could have been all kinds of weirdness that happened. Even just updating your system could have introduced some weird crap. But in this case, I think that we've gotten to the point now where the majority of users aren't going to deal with anything that's like that. You're not going to have to worry about updating your drivers unless you're an early adopter, but most people won't even have to care. And I think that the main aspect is like the user experience is a lot less involved than it is now because of like all the application formats and then PPAs. In some cases, you don't even have to worry about PPAs anymore. You can just use the app format, like the universal stuff, like snaps and flatpaks and app images.
Yeah, most of
Um,
the time, but I still see some people or articles suggesting to use PPAs, and whenever I see a PPA,
that's true.
yeah,
But to be
there's
fair,
no.
most people don't even update their tutorials for a long time. I mean, like, there's
Yeah,
actually,
exactly.
I wrote an article specifically about why people don't have, why their tutorials for Ubuntu are still telling people to use apt-get. And it's because 90% of the people, 99% of people at the time didn't know apt existed as a command. And it had existed when I wrote that like for 2 years. And just people didn't know about it because the documentation and the tutorials weren't updated up to date. And then after the transition from me explaining it to people and like promoting that information, it started becoming more and more people using apt. So I think that there's going to be tutorials because of the fact that Linux has been around. Like the community transparency and openness and sharing, you could kind of argue has like a little bit of bit rot because after a certain amount of time, all that stuff is not relevant anymore.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of old articles, but also people that still use old stuff. Just a couple of days ago, I
Well, yeah.
was working on my home server, and I couldn't get Network Manager to work properly. And I saw a bunch of people suggesting to do things that you weren't supposed to do, skipping Network Manager completely and just using if config, not even IP.
Mm.
That's those were very recent articles referring specifically to 1804.
Oh, wow. In those cases, I don't know. there's
See, that's my
there's going to
point.
be people who are doing bad suggestions for sure, and I think that there's even that's never going to go away really because people want to help and they just might just repeat what they were told by someone else that didn't know, and then they were kind of repeating it with like authority as if they know. That's going to happen. I think that's we're not it's not avoidable really, but I don't think that it would really impact the most people, because like when I look at the idea of the average user, I'm talking about the people who get a computer and never install an operating system, have no idea how to do that, and all they want to do is just use the applications that they want to use, and then that's it. And there's actually people I have moved over to Linux that literally never installed anything themselves, and I just installed the stuff that they wanted, and they've never bothered to care about anything else. And all they do is just run the updates, get the security patches and everything, and they don't have to worry about installing anything, so they don't have to worry about anything breaking. Now, that's a very specific use case, but I do think that there's a ton of people. I think there's more people who are like that than early adopters or enthusiasts or anything.
Well, definitely, because the problem is, okay, so for the kind of user that you're describing, the problem is not completely 100% there, because, as you said, most of the time they're not even going to bother to install anything. They're going to use the browser or whatever they have pre-installed, and that's a fair point. And actually, those kind of users, they're probably the ones that are going to have the best time with Linux. But at the same time, there are people like that consider themselves like more passionate or enthusiastic about technology and stuff, and they think to know how to do stuff, particularly with like the so-called Windows power users, that they kind of know their way around Windows, and they go to Linux and they expect things to work in a certain way. Like when they go to install software, they search on Google for it, and maybe they even expect to go on certain websites to download it, to some certain websites that they do know, and then they maybe get to a tarball and hopefully to an app image, but that's not really how it's supposed to be done in Linux, and that's very hard to control those people, to put them on the right path, because they're the ones that are gonna break things, and they're the ones that are gonna go out there and say that Linux sucks because they couldn't get this or that to work because they didn't know the right way to do it.
Yeah, I'd say in this case, in that particular case, someone who is a power user and insists on learning, then they could kind of use whatever they want as long as they're aware of the caveats to whatever they choose. If someone was like, I want to use Linux, but I want to get to like the bare bones and I want to learn as much as I can, and they decide to use Arch and are aware that what's necessary to use Arch, then have at it. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, no.
So it just depends on what they have.
That's actually a very good case here, because what I was talking about is people using like something like Ubuntu, not Ubuntu specifically, and once they have the system already set up, because the installer actually sets up everything for them, they actually go ahead and do these weird things and etc. etc. All that stuff. But I think we should move on from that. The next topic I wanted to cover is content creation, because both of us, we are content creators. We do YouTube videos. I do some graphics. I do some programming. You do some graphics as well. That's actually kind of your job, right?
Yeah, I do graphic design, logo design, web design. I also do like development marketing, but as far as like my main thing is pretty much designer.
Okay, so for those kind of people, do you think there is a particular need of a specific distribution, or would you just say whatever should work?
It depends on mainly the reason. As far as content creation, it really just depends on the applications and what you have access
sure. I mean,
to.
let's say okay, a YouTuber, video editor that also needs to do some graphics on the side, because we also do that.
Well, as far as content creation, as far as video production and stuff, I would say that pretty much any distribution is fine, mainly because of the fact that the application, the tools that I use are packaged in like every option. So OBS is available in basically every format. as like native applications as well as the universal formats. And the Kdenlive team create app images for their usage. So regardless of what you use, you can just get the app image, and it works solid, like totally fine. Well, in terms of Kdenlive, of course, but there's like the majority of the people who would do content creation don't really have to care, depending on their hardware. If they want to have, well, I guess the biggest content creation problem would be game streaming, because you have to have that. You have to have the latest graphic drivers and everything, and you have to have a powerful computer to do that. So in those cases, probably something like a rolling distro would work better. But and everything else as far as content creation, like making a podcast or something, or making graphics, I think that those really doesn't matter for the most part.
All right, so we're pretty much on the same line here, because really the thing about content creation is that, as you said, all the software is basically universally packaged. So, and that's really one of the greatest things that have come to Linux world in the recent times, especially app image for some stuff is very convenient. But also Flatpak and Snap, they are very nice, but as for content creation in particular, I don't think they're the best. In my experience, sandboxing, particularly with Flatpaks, has caused some problems with Kdenlive, for instance, where I can use my GPU to render videos, and that's something else that adds more complication, more complexity on top of the user experience. Because yeah, and there's also this weird thing that we're telling people, okay, you have to download software from the repos, but if you need to use Kdenlive, you need to download the app image. And there's also that weird thing that if you want to enable GPU acceleration, you have to jump through some other hoops, and it gets really complicated very fast.
Yeah, it totally can.
As of now, I don't think there is a very good solution for that. Maybe
not really.
Maybe Lightworks. Lightworks.
The video Lightworks is good. I think that Lightworks is a good editor, but I think the barrier of the price is actually kind of a negative aspect to it. But other than that, I think that, because if you want to use the free version, it's so limited that you really can't fully grasp like how powerful it is. But it is a nice tool because it does have it kind of bypasses some of those issues. But I think that the universal formats are both fantastic and at the same time kind of complicated to a confusing point for some people, because you have to figure out like, well, which format is used by this developer? Where do I get this particular format? If it's an app image, I mean, you have to just hope that the developer puts it out as a version. So like there's a lot of developers I've seen where they make app images, but they don't tell you that's how you get the app image. So when you go to download it, they send you off to the GitHub release or the GitHub project, not even the releases section. You have to go to the releases, then find the app image there. Like that can be definitely some confusing situations for people, because it's not officially on their website. So you're downloading it from a third party, and it might make them, cautious about it, because typically Windows users are told not to download stuff from third parties. But there is also a bonus that in the future, this will be a lot more seamless, because the various different software managers are integrating some app image functionality. I don't know how much GNOME software is doing it, but I know that like AppGrid and the just Plasma KDE Discover is adding app image support, so you could be able to find and install applications or using app images through those software centers, which would be massively improvement to the current situation that most people have to deal with.
Yeah, I mean that's still kind of undergoing though, so that's still kind of a problem. I think that a content creator, as of now, maybe they can use whatever, but they should also be aware of how to use the tools that they need.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it's kind of a situation where the content creation is there's no good answer, because, well, actually any answer is fine, because the software just matters. Where you just have to know what software you need and where to get it. And I guess in a way, something like Ubuntu Studio might be more helpful, because if you've never used Linux before and you wanted to do content creation, you don't know what the software is called, it might be good to be something like that where you have that stuff pre-installed. So maybe that's an option.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't really thinking about Ubuntu Studio, but actually that's a pretty good choice. As you said, people get to know the software that they need without having to research it because it's already built in. And
Yeah.
plus, I remember that they were doing some really fancy stuff with pre-configuring Jack. Is that right?
Oh yeah, they do jack and stuff. They do pulse improvements. They also have a low latency kernel, so the audio production is a lot cleaner and a lot easier to set up because they already have most of that pre-done. And it's really cool because they do all this stuff for you. And they also, if you're brand new to Linux, like for example, Ryan, the co-host of Destination Linux, when he started with, he's told us a couple times on his thing, when he started with Linux, he didn't know what software was what. He didn't know what alternatives were for video editors or anything. So
of course,
when he said that he found Ubuntu Studio, and it helped him stay with Linux because it showed him all these different options that were pre-installed for content creation. So like I think that's a really good option, especially considering Ubuntu Studio is working on a new feature where you'll be able to install all the like the jack setup and the configurations and everything in other Ubuntu flavors through a PPA.
yeah, that's
So like that is going to be really cool.
exactly. So I wasn't really thinking about that. It's great that you brought it up because actually, maybe Ubuntu Studio is a very good choice for new content creators coming to Linux.
Yeah, I think we agree on that. Ubuntu Studio for content creation is probably the best option. If you don't know what you're looking for, it solves that problem completely.
So let's now move on. So as for programming, I am a programmer myself, and I don't really know what's the best distro for programmers. In a way, I always orbit around the idea of a rolling release because especially if you're doing like universal packages like Flatpak and Snap, I think that having a rolling release is a very nice thing. Because you probably, if you're developing something, you want to have all of the latest software, all the latest libraries and packages and all that kind of stuff right in your distributions repositories. So that you can package it in a Flatpak or an app image or whatever, and you don't have to mess around to install them in your system. And particularly for one of the latest applications I've been working on, I've been using libhandy as an example, developed by Purism for basically making GTK more responsive to work better on mobile phones. And I found that I think that the only distro that ships libhandy in their repos is Arch as of right now. Not even Fedora has it.
Yeah, I think that's true. I haven't seen many distros have that. I haven't, to be honest, I haven't really looked that much, but the only one I did notice was Arch having it.
Yeah,
But as far as like the programming, I think that you have a situation where programming is expecting a certain level of experience of someone, maybe not experience, but willing to use a system. So maybe programming is like the type of user where a rolling release kind of makes sense, regardless if they're a beginner or not, just because of like the type of person to become a programmer also is someone who is willing to get like really deep into the system. So a rolling release would probably be perfectly fine with them.
you know what? I can tell you from my personal experience that that's not always true. I am a computer science student as of right now. I'm getting my junior degree soon, and
Nice.
thanks. I have actually many classmates that have the same idea I have, so they actually are using Arch. But some others that don't really agree with me and are kind of in the middle between a consumer and a professional. They in a way that they want the consumer experience, um, and they also want simplicity and like they want their IDE to do everything for them, that kind of stuff. So I think there are different kinds of programmers. What's it for me? I tell everyone to use Arch regardless, because because let's say it's the superior distribution, but
Sure,
not
sure.
everyone think not everyone thinks the same. And the problem
I
here,
agree, but I just want really quick. I agree that you're right about the programming. There's a lot of people who don't necessarily. I mean, there's people who program on Mac, so they definitely are.
exactly,
There's
that's the
some,
point.
yeah. So and you have a good point. I just think in the way of programmers, it's probably easier to say that use whatever you want because even a rolling release because or a rolling distro because of the they're trying to do something that is more like lower level user type so that having to use a lower level system would probably be okay for them. So I guess in this case this is also one of those anybody could use whatever distro they want.
I think that a good choice here could be something like specifically Manjaro or Antergos. If you're not willing to install Arch, and you really should, especially if you're interested in the in all that goes into how an operating system works and how an operating system is set up, you should really go with something like Antergos or Manjaro because you get the same experience, and I think they can be advanced enough users to get around how Pacman works and the little things that they have to do once Arch or whatever for it is installed. So I think here the rolling model again is probably the best choice, and particularly if you want to develop, also want to give you a suggestion. If you want to develop anything for Linux in particular, target universal packages first. Like I personally
Oh yeah.
prefer Flatpak. I personally prefer Flatpak myself because I find it's more compatible with practically any distro, although it's not as easy to set up on every distribution. But also, if you like, is okay. We can talk about that. Hold that
Yeah,
thought.
I mean, I think flat packs are good. I think that and I don't have any preference between which one is the better option. I think that they're all great, and I love the fact that they all work together and they don't conflict with each other, so that you could use whatever you want and developers can use whatever they want. That's awesome. But I do think that Snaps, that the support part of Snap and Flatpak are very similar. Like there are distributions that don't support Snaps because they don't have AppArmor, for example, but there are a lot of distributions that do, especially because the AppArmor is available as a module for the kernel. There's many distributions that come with AppArmor by default. Like Ubuntu, of course, has that, but there's also OpenSUSE has it by default, and Debian 10, which is coming out. Well, who knows? But Debian 10 is going to have AppArmor by default. And Fedora has support for AppArmor, and there's Arch can have it, and so you can basically get at least most you can get all the main distros, all the big names. You might not get some other like fringe stuff, like maybe Alpine or Void. You probably wouldn't be able to get Snap on, but or NixOS, but you could definitely get it for the majority of distros. And I think so because so I don't think that the support availability is that much of a difference because for the most people, most users, they're probably going to be able to use all three. And I think that's probably the best option is just to pick whichever, like whatever the dev wants to use is fine. And I think snaps are cool in the sense of the way they do this, the confinement. And I also think that the way they have the transactional updates is really cool. Whereas Flatpak is kind of it's kind of heavy in the way that they package everything.
Well, I
Whereas
don't know.
I mean, they do have the runtime system, which is a good solution. But the way that snaps are like they have the core snap functionality, which is really cool idea where you can create your own snap and then have like dependencies of one snap to another snap, or you can use the core snaps that they provide to be dependencies as well. So you don't have to contain everything inside the single snap. Where a lot of people think that you do have to do that, but you don't, and I think that's what makes it a good option. But either way, I think that both Flatpak and Snaps are fantastic options for developers. I just wanted to point out that a lot of distros can support Snaps, even though maybe they don't come by default. Like I don't think a lot of them come by default with it, but it totally is possible for pretty much everything. Not everything, but pretty much.
Yeah, I mean the point here is that, as you said, the most limiting factor for snaps, in my opinion, is the kernel module itself. Because the nice thing about Flatpak is that it doesn't need anything, and it's not really even centralized. There's been some centralization around FlatHub, but that's not really
No,
necessarily.
no, no. The centralized thing is a complete
Yeah, I know you can
broken
make a
concept
snap
that people.
repository. I know you can make a snap repository
Yes,
because they said it's basically just Apache. They said, and anyway, an HTTP server with some.
But even then, I'm saying that the argument that not having centralized is a terrible argument, in my opinion, because if you someone says use Flatpak, and then you go, where do we get the Flatpak? It's harder to find Flatpaks without FlatHub than it is app images, because you also not only have to find the actual reference file for the install, you have to find out what the remote server it's on, and you have to do that weird command structure that Flatpaks have. So I think not only is centralized repo good for these formats, I think they're a necessity, and I think it's kind of unfortunate that app images don't have one, or they do, but they're kind of not because they're community managed and they're not really that kind of thing. I think FlatHub I think FlatHub is a necessity for Flatpaks to actually become any competitor to Snaps at all.
In a way, it is, but at the same time, I always imagine this scenario. A company makes a software, be it free or proprietary, it doesn't really matter, and they want to distribute it, let's say with Flatpak. They can create their own repository and be in control of the distribution of the Flatpak itself. And that's not really
But they can
very
be anyway.
easy. Well, it's not that easy. If you want to, either you want to use FlatHub or if you want to use Snap, it's not that easy to do that. And maybe in this case, it's probably better to use AppImage anyway. But if you want a real repository, you can use Flatpak. Because you can set up your own repo as you can with Snap, but it's more streamlined with Flatpak. There is more support because they're built in, and I think it makes sense to have like FlatHub be the default repository for any Flatpak installation, regardless of the distribution, and
I
maybe
agree, but
that's good.
there's a break point there though. So like even if you do have the ability, even if that let's say that a company or developer wants to have their own repository for Flatpak, you're still going to have to explain to people how to use it. You're still going to have to
Well, you can make a
get
Flatpak
it.
ref, and it's a
Yeah, but
file,
then
you
you
open
also
it in.
you still have to explain people how to use it because by default it's a terminal command
No, I
because it's
mean
not going to be
you can
in
just.
any software centers.
I think you can just make a file and people download that and it opens up in GNOME software. That's the repo and installs the whole thing. Maybe I'm wrong.
Maybe it does. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it has if those files, because if you get those files in the command line for even FlatHub, you have to specify that you're getting it from FlatHub. So when you take the command line and you don't click the auto install or whatever with whatever software center you have, and you have to use the command, it does specify that you have to tell it that it's FlatHub. So I think that you still have to do that, and majority of the time, I could be wrong about it, but I think
I'm not
that
sure, to be honest.
if if a developer wanted to do it, I think they care more about the reason they use the universal formats is because they want as many people to be able to use it. So they want to have support for as many distributions and everything. And I think trying to do your own repo is a contradictory to the concept of having the most people use it, because the most people are going to be using whatever centralized hub is existing, such as FlatHub. So I think that the argument for the centralized for Flatpak versus Snap is just a broken argument because Flatpaks also require some kind of centralized repository for people to get access to it. Because I personally don't want to go find some random server, remote server, and try to connect it to my Flatpaks when the most logical place for a developer to put it would be in FlatHub. And I think that's what most developers would choose anyway.
That's a fair point. Actually a fair point. It's more, this way it becomes more like a Play Store paradigm in a way that has
Yeah, I
worked
mean,
so far.
I just think that they're both. I think all these universal formats require a centralized location to get them, and I think that that's the biggest negative to app images is that they don't have that, and it's really hard to find them.
Yeah.
But overall, I think that the app images are fantastic as well. You know, there's other issues that they all have issues, but I just think that it's definitely a necessity to have that access because the users don't really want to have any extra hassle, and that's why they want to use these formats, and that's the best way to do it.
Yeah, I think the main problem here is also, well, not main. One of the problems is that the more people start using these universal formats, especially if they are centralized, the more maintainership they will require. And we already have seen a case of some crypto mining malware in the Snap Store. I don't really want to get there because it could have happened in FlatHub as well. Exactly.
Well, yeah, and also way. In Arch because it has happened in the
AUR. It's happened in the AUR, exactly.
Sure.
And well, the AUR is not really doesn't really have any quality control at all by design, by choice.
Right. Well, anything that opens the ability for having public submissions for software or whatever can have some bad actors submitting garbage to the community or to the platform. That's just going to happen regardless. Like, and the same thing is like you could have a website that allows you to share deb files. It's the same kind of thing. Like, it doesn't really matter what the format is as long as you allow user contribution. Definitely going to be people who are not really are good citizens to the community and just share garbage because they can.
Yeah, that's always a problem. In fact, in the Play Store, we also always see this kind of software. It's kind of shady. Mm-hmm. Is it malware or not? It's probably malware.
If you can't tell, it probably is. Yeah.
Let's say that for programmers, they can use whatever. Rolling would be better. I think we can move on.
I would agree. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we can move on to, okay, the last consumer use case we have here is the typical home computer user or office worker that just needs to use the computer. And we can kind of see these from two sides. One side could be I set up a computer for my family or for this family member, and I just want to do as few maintenance as possible. And I think for that, there are mainly two choices here, in my opinion. And those are Ubuntu LTS and Debian. Probably Debian stable. I'd probably go with that. What do you think?
Well, it depends on what if you're doing the entire setup for them and you're just handing them the computer with everything and you're getting all the software on it and they're the type who doesn't really need anything extra to do. Debian is a fantastic choice because you have like 3 to 5 years of support, more depending on which one you get, whatever. Where you have like they don't have to do any kind of updating other than like the basic updates of apt-get or apt update and stuff. Well, I think that's a great option, but there also might be some issues of like availability of packaging and stuff because when Debian 10 comes out, I think it'll be a lot easier and a lot cleaner to have support for everything because snaps are not as well supported on Debian 9 as they will be on 10. Like it is possible and it does work fine, but there are some issues. Yeah. So, but if you do it for them and you set up everything for them and all they have to do is just turn it on and use it, you could basically give them anything, and Debian would be a good option because you don't have to go back and do much really. Maybe remote in and do some upgrades and stuff like that.
Yeah, and also if you're like setting up, there's this use case that I really like to think about, even if it's not really what I am doing. When I have to set up a computer for a family member, I usually think of it as a company. If I have to set up a computer for a company I'm working for, and it's a non-technical user needs to use that, I want it to work as much as possible, and I put myself in the position to do some maintaining like remotely and stuff. But at the same time, I want to I don't want to touch it as much as possible because that's how that's the way it can be more efficient. The user can be more efficient. The computer can be more efficient. So that's why I have like a particular spot in my heart for this use case for Debian stable. But probably for a less uncapable user, you can, if you want, maybe Ubuntu LTS is probably better because you still have those 4 years of support, but you have more software availability and doing even installing software and the general usage of the system is probably easier for the everyday user.
Yeah, I'd agree. And also that if they do need some kind of tutorial or whatever, there's going to be tons of options for those. So I would agree.
Yeah. And I mean, it's not like everyone needs to move on from a distribution. We are tech heads, we are enthusiasts ourselves, so we like to explore and to distro hop sometimes and to try this or that new distro, but probably it's best for everyone once they find a distribution that just works for them to stick to that for as long as possible, and that would actually be a testament to the appropriateness of the distribution for that particular use case.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think that an LTS or Debian would be a great option for those types of people. Just basically anything that's long-term support would be great.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly the point. Let's now move on to the last. I think we can summarize these 2 points in one: server and embedded or IoT. Those two use cases are really very similar to each other in that you still want to do as few maintenance as possible, and you want those systems to be as stable as they can get, and also to have as few moving parts as possible. So again, here we have the choice of stability, but there are some other new players that come into the discussion now, and I'm talking about CentOS and Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And I'm not too experienced with those. So what are your opinions on them, and how do they compare to something like Ubuntu LTS or Debian?
Well, there's many different benefits to in the server farm. There's a ton of options that are LTS and also even longer. Really, like they're ridiculously long term support. But CentOS is something I've been using for many years for web servers. And there's also a lot of features. There's actually some software that requires you to use CentOS or Red Hat in order to have that software.
Yeah, like
and yeah, like that one, which is very weird. Yeah, that is the weirdest example. Like a server, because it's not a server software.
Exactly.
But the fact that they even did that, it's so confusing. I don't like just packages an app image or whatever. Like, anyway,
there are some movie studios that use RHEL actually.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense that they would want to have support for having support on those distributions, but you could have support with app images as well as every other distro too. And it's just weird that they chose that. Exactly. But it is an interesting point because they did choose Red Hat and CentOS as their only supported distro. But there are server-based stuff. Like there's a really popular web server control panel called cPanel, and it is exclusive to CentOS and Red Hat.
Is it?
Yeah, and it's you wouldn't really notice it if you use like a shared hosting service because they provide cPanel almost always. But if you set it up yourself, it does require to have those distributions, otherwise you can't have it. So
I had no idea.
Those kind of situations where it makes sense that someone would want CentOS for those situations. And I do like CentOS for the benefit of servers and everything, but there's also arguments for Ubuntu LTS because you have the Snap server side.
Exactly.
And there's so many things that are amazing to use. Like for example, if you install an application for Nextcloud, if you did that with the normal native way of installing for a server, it is quite painful and it takes a while to set up and all the different configurations. If you use the Snap install, it's basically one line and you're done.
And like that is what I have set up in my home server. Yeah. I have a Nextcloud instance that I set up with Snap, and on the previous iteration of my server, I tried installing Nextcloud manually, and that's not where you want it to go.
Yeah, you don't want to do that. And the funny thing is that when I first started using Nextcloud, it was OwnCloud at the time, I was using the like the basic install, and every time an upgrade happened, I was like, I just don't want to use it anymore because it's
Yeah.
such a pain. Like, and as soon as the snap comes out, it's such a smooth experience now that it's so much better. So the snaps, having support of snaps on a server is a very, very useful feature. So I would say if someone was a wanted to run their own home server or wanted to run a server at a company or whatever, I would say that depending on what you want to do, Ubuntu LTS or CentOS would be the best option, unless you're like an enterprise company and you want to deal with Red Hat. But I think that both of those options are probably the best ones. I think Debian is great, but if you're going to use the Debian-based system for the server, Ubuntu makes more sense because of the snap support and because of all the other features that it provides. So I would go with Ubuntu over Debian in that case, even though I know a lot of people are going to not appreciate that response because Debian is known for being the server distro, but it is what it is.
Well, you know what? I actually love Ubuntu on server, and particularly about snaps. I think that the kernel level mandatory access control that AppArmor gives makes a lot of sense in the server space. Particularly for I don't remember exactly how they were called, but there were some attacks to Apache and attacks that something like AppArmor or Linux could have prevented. And if you if you had like a vulnerable Apache instead of a snap, it wouldn't have been a problem at all because of the AppArmor confinement.
And that's yes, I mean that's totally possible.
And that's something I really like about the snaps. And the thing is that they even tend to cross the line with Docker images and stuff like that. And Docker is a fair bit more complicated to use and to set up than snaps. And if the snaps do really pick up in the server space, that'd be very nice for me as a professional IT.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think snaps are fantastic for servers. I think that just Nextcloud is an example. If you want to see the benefit of snaps on a server, just try to install Nextcloud the regular way, the manual way, then do the snap way, and you will immediately understand why snaps are fantastic for servers. And there's so many other things that make Ubuntu's solution for servers better, just because of having the support for various different structures. So you can still use you can still use it as a desktop if you wanted to. See the compatibility between someone using it for their server and then someone using it at a workstation at a company, and they having the packages for support for everything at the same, like all on the same platform. There's a lot of value in that too, because a lot of people are not going to push CentOS or Red Hat as a workstation. You can, but even Red Hat doesn't do that. So I mean, not as far as their inside, in like they probably do that in house, but I mean they don't promote it as desktop. That's why they made Fedora. So yeah. I think it's a fantastic option. Snaps are a fantastic option for the server, and I think that they are going to more than likely surpass or usurp Docker, because Docker has the issue of Docker's issue of everything's in Docker, but also most of the stuff in Docker doesn't get updated ever. So
yeah, and also getting inside, like tweaking a Docker container that's running is probably one of the most painful things you can ever do. And one of the things that I hate about Docker is that once you do an update, you actually have a whole new container from scratch. You don't have anything from the previous instance, and in fact that's why databases are usually a separate Docker container from whatever the main backend you're running is.
Right, and also having those multiple Dockers gives you a lot of overhead too.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's so many reasons why snaps are better for in that situation. So I think that they will. I don't know when, but I do think that they will use her Docker.
I really hope so. We didn't really touch on embedded or IoT, and I really think that this is a very similar use case in a way, but also kind of a little bit different. particularly in IoT and embedded stuff, you want to have as few software as possible. You want to have a very small distro, very small kernel, and possibly a very small user land, and just the core software that the appliance needs to run
Mm-hmm.
on top of it. And for that, I really think that Debian probably makes the most sense, even though apt is not the most lightweight package manager, and it tends to install all of the suggested but not required dependencies by default. So it's kind of the middle ground, but probably Debian is a good choice, and it has been a choice for things like Raspberry Pis and single core computers like. So, what do you think about that? Do you have a better choice for for an embedded slash IoT operating system solution?
A better choice, probably not. I think that Ubuntu is a good option as well for IoT because of the Ubuntu the Snappy Core structure. Because the Snappy Core is like the Ubuntu Snappy Core and the Snappy applications like Snaps are separate because the Ubuntu Snappy Core is like it's a system where it's a very small system that's entirely Snaps, and that is an interesting option for embedded devices in IoT. So I think that is something someone wanted to look into. That's a good option for it. But Debian is also like the Raspbian is based on Debian, and you have all the majority of the appliance based distributions that are specific to a particular use case is going to be used using Debian as the base for it. So like for example, like Kodi applications, like the media player, media center application for Kodi, most of the distributions that ship Kodi as the main purpose for that ISO, you have Debian in the back end to power majority of it. So they put the Kodi into it, do customizations to Debian, and they still have that main base of Debian.
Yeah, but it's possible to make it as little as you want.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm saying like that's what the benefit of it, because like for example, LibreElec is if you wanted to do a media center, I would not go with Debian because you'd have to set up everything yourself. But if you were going to do LibreElec, you could actually have the thing everything done for you. So that's the main thing about these IoT and these appliance distributions is that there are many distributions that are specifically for whatever purpose that you want it to do, and you don't have to. And because you want it to be as simple as possible, you don't want any extra stuff. So if you were going to use a Kodi Media Center for a Raspberry Pi or something, you could use LibreElec because their tagline is just enough OS for Kodi.
Yeah.
So like yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that. Also, Screenly for digital signage, where it's specifically an ISO for that one purpose. Like, I think that's the best option. Is like try to find something that is exactly what you want, because that's the more likelihood to work for what you're trying to do. But if you're wanting to kind of build from scratch, build up yourself, Debian is probably the best option.
Yeah, but that's kind of weird in a way because Debian is not like one of the smallest distros. In contrast with something like maybe Alpine that really wants to be an embedded slash as little as possible Linux distro. Have you ever tried Alpine yourself?
I've tried it, but not extensively. I've just tried to like kind of experience it sort of, but I've never actually put a lot of effort into it. So I don't really have an opinion of Alpine specifically because I don't think that I've had enough time using it to have an opinion. But I do think that Alpine is very interesting and what their goals are. And I think the biggest issue with Alpine is probably the package availability. They're not as good as Debian or Ubuntu example. So I think that's the only thing I would say that makes it a choice to maybe consider or maybe not.
Maybe in a way, the fact that they're so different from what people are used to makes it a less interesting. Well, less. It's not your first option. It's not the first thing you think about when you're thinking Linux, and that's probably because it's not as standard, and it wants to be standard in a way.
And that's just a good point because I didn't even think about it. Right, that does. But yeah, that's pretty much the exact thing I was thinking. because I wouldn't. I mean, it was the thing that your point about you're not, it's because it's so different. You're not even going to think about it. But yeah, I think it does have a lot of potential. I just think that my suggestion, if someone wanted to get the best distro for insert specific IoT thing, is try to find something that is for that purpose. And because
Yeah.
there are quite a few of those, especially even like home automation and all kinds of stuff like specifically for that.
Well, if you are thinking about choosing an OS for IoT, you're probably building something yourself. So that's something.
Totally, it depends on it depends if you're trying to build your like deploy an IoT solution. Yeah, more than likely
Well,
they're going to build it yourself.
both probably if you want to deploy, there are probably ISOs already built for that.
Right.
If you want to create something new,
Mhm.
so we can say probably Debian, but give Alpine a try as well.
Yeah,
Something on
I would
that
agree
line.
completely. Yep.
All right. And finally, do you want to say to touch on the appliance use case? Actually, you proposed it.
Yeah, I was just saying that there's different. This kind of applies to the same in a way that there's the IoT is similar in the way that appliance structure works. But if, for example, you're going to do something that's very specific use case, like benchmarking, or you're going to do like the scientific Linux or something that's like that, these distros that have like specific tools for like educational purposes for like universities to run experiments with. Those are interesting because like the best distro for that is typically, I mean, probably scientific Linux because it has all these different software for math formulas and everything, and also like just experimentation stuff. As far as in the like, depending on what they have, like so many different tools that I can't think of all of them that are for that purpose of education that I didn't even know existed until I started to use or try out scientific Linux. But and there's actually like really extensive like power user tools for that field in those kinds of distros. So I was just saying like those kinds of distros are interesting because they're appliance based, but they're also like very powerful specific appliances, and I think that they're
Yeah.
worth checking out if you're in that kind of field.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's very nice. This appliance idea, this appliance structure, is something that I really started to to like the idea of, especially since I think Noah started talking about like podcasting appliances in
Hmm.
his Ask Noah show a while ago. Um,
Yeah, we talked about that. I think that might have been prompted because we had in Destination Linux about AV Linux and what's the point of having AV Linux? Because because the argument was, or the discussion was about what was the point of AV Linux and Ubuntu Studio, because all these all these distributions could do
do the same
everything that
thing.
those things do, right? But in the sense of like an appliance structure, plus to get the defaults of like not knowing whether software is available, that kind of thing. But also, if you took Ubuntu Studio and use it as an appliance to do a production environment for, like you're doing an event of a concert or something, and you wanted all the benefits of Jack and everything, you could use Ubuntu Studio as a appliance distro. And I think that's an interesting point because there's a lot of stuff that you could do with a variety of different distros depending on what type of appliance you need.
Exactly, and that's something that's an idea. It's really cool because you actually having, if you have the possibility, of course, to have one machine that's dedicated to one particular task. Having an appliance like distro is probably the best option because you're gonna avoid like conflicts with anything. For instance, this system that I use it for streaming, for video editing, and for gaming, and for programming, and I needed to be versatile. But if I had the possibility to have like a dedicated streaming machine, I'd probably throw Ubuntu LTS or Ubuntu Studio at this point on it and just use it only for streaming, and that would be a much better experience, even with something like capture cards. A little behind the scenes, just before starting this stream, I had my capture card for working for kind of approximately 2 hours, and when I was about to start the stream, it stopped working out of nowhere, and I have no idea why. But I have so many stuff plugged into my computer that I just have no idea, and I just had to fall back to the webcam. So having like specific appliance like machines for this kind of mission critical jobs, it's not like this is mission critical, but you get what I mean, is always probably the best option.
I'm really happy that those exist because having the appliance approach is great. I mean, you actually think about it, the fragmentation would also be impossible. Like without fragmentation, it would be impossible to have
Exactly.
these types of appliance distros. So the more and more we're talking, the more and more I like the fragmentation, even if I do have some issues with some agreement with the fact that it's confusing. But the longer this conversation goes, the more I'm like, well, is it that bad of an issue because we have all these different solutions for all these different problems? And it's like, yeah, it is kind of awesome that stuff like Ubuntu Studio exists and the stuff like IoT stuff for like Alpine exists, and so
That's the point.
I'm leaning more towards you on that situation.
That's yeah, that's great. That's the point. Fragmentation, it's marginally, it's superficially bad because it's not really. Um, we get all of these advantages of having a modular system and an operating system that can be adapted to all kinds of different use cases, and that's because that's thanks to the fact that it's free software, and fragmentation is a function of being able to do so many things with our operating system.
Oh yeah, like it's something I didn't really think about it, and it's like, oh, I knew it is an issue, and like that it's not as bad as it is because without that you wouldn't have all these different benefits. So yeah, I totally agree at this point.
Yeah, I mean it's like I don't know, it's like stopping progress, scientific progress, just because we fear what could happen if. It's kind of
Yeah,
kind of the same thing. I mean, one has to software to innovate in a way.
I totally agree.
Look at
Well,
the
we have to
chat.
talk about the desktop environment argument.
Oh, right. That's a
Yeah,
thing.
that's
Well, there's not very much to say really here. One of the things that about fragmentation that probably bugs users the most is having different desktop environments, because if you're talking about like package managers, or I don't know, apps, or
Mhm.
kernels, that's basically kind of works kind of the same across all distros. But desktop environments, they're very different and they work in very different ways. And probably one of the best well, having, again, fragmentation is good because many different people have different needs, as we already said. But probably having one streamlined, like standard in a way desktop environment is kind of a good thing. And since we all know that Plasma kind of sucks, um, it's
How
good
dare
that
you?
it's GNOME.
How dare you? First of all, Plasma is awesome. So let's clarify that.
Well, if it's Plasma, it's not
Okay.
awesome.
First of all, Plasma is awesome in Kubuntu because all the weirdness is fixed in by default.
No,
So
Michael. If it's Plasma, it's not awesome as in awesome window.
okay,
manager.
it's not awesome. It's an awesome Plasma, but it's not awesome Window Manager. That's true. That is the worst name for a window manager ever because it's so confusing.
Well, it's awesome.
Well, yeah. When you search for it online, if it's awesome window manager, and it's just like literally everything applies to that because people's opinions and stuff. It's like that's just a bad name. Change the name or change the spelling of it, and that would work. But anyway, Plasma is a great, fantastic, and awesome desktop environment,
Okay.
and I think that it does have some issues by default. It has some weird settings that are arguably terrible, but at the same time, it's functionally fantastic. So you have so much potential in this thing that if you were to give this as a default, I think people would like it. But I think Kubuntu is the one that people should try. If you never used Plasma or you haven't used it in a long time, try Plasma via Kubuntu. And then if you like the setup, you can go use whatever. You can change whatever you want if you want to. But I think that if you start with Plasma, you're going to find some weird stuff that you have to change for no reason, whereas Kubuntu fixes those things. But as far as like the standard DE thing goes, I think that that's actually it's an interesting thing that we should have, but we don't have. Even though we kind of do, we don't. So, for example, a lot of distros are shipping GNOME or GNOME as the default. But at the same time, none of them ship the default, and all of them customize everything.
That's fair. That's a
So,
fair point. Well, actually, Arch. Okay.
well, I mean, Arch
Arch
ships the
doesn't count.
default for
Arch
everything,
doesn't
and
count. Fedora
yeah,
ships default.
right.
Pretty much.
No, they have modifications. They have modifications.
Really?
They install extensions that do modify stuff. But at the same time,
You know that.
they like the default for GNOME requires modifications. It requires extensions to do all
That's a fair
kinds of
point.
important things. So like even though GNOME is really heavily used as far as like the default like DE, it's not default because no one agrees what it should be, how it should work, what it should look like, what features it should have, and everything. So even if you have Ubuntu with GNOME and you go install Solus GNOME or you install Fedora, the experience is going to be drastically different in many ways, especially like with the fact that GNOME is removing desktop icons and system tray icons and all this other stuff for no reason.
Well,
Even
actually,
we technically have a standard, but we don't.
That's been discussed about the removal of features. It's mostly because there are people that want to maintain those features.
That's not a good reason.
Is it better to have a feature that's not working or not to have that feature at all?
You get people to work on it. Yeah. It's better to have it.
That's a problem. That's one of the problems.
You have a company that's Red Hat. That is the people who fund GNOME.
You should completely Red Hat, really, because Canonical has been doing a lot more with GNOME than Red Hat has.
Right, that's the thing, because the people who work on GNOME are employees of Red Hat. Red Hat is like a fundamental backer of GNOME, but at the same time, GNOME is doing all these different things that don't make any sense. And yeah, it's so weird. Like people, like this is a thing that actually is kind of a annoyance to me. It's like a pet peeve to me. Is people who were so adamantly hating the Unity, and Unity did so many things better than GNOME. Actually, Unity did a lot of things better than everything.
Well,
so multi-monitors was better. Do what?
In terms of user experience, probably. The thing that I really didn't like about Unity is that it was written on top of Compiz. It was basically just a Compiz, what's the word? Applet? I don't even know. Anyway, Compiz is really old technology, and it was picked up by Canonical just to maintain Unity. And I don't think it was the best option. I would have gone like more towards the Mate route, so forking GNOME 2 and working on that instead of just.
Well, the problem with that is like the Unity situation Canonical had. That this is an interesting in general, but it's not necessarily related to best distro. But the conversation that I wanted about this part is that Canonical has always had people hate them for not invented here syndrome. But what the options they had at the time were terrible. Like GNOME 3, when it first was launched, was so awful and broken that Linus Torvalds made a blog post saying how awful and broken it was.
Yeah, those were times. And in fact, they went with the XFC.
Yeah, exactly. They all everybody abandoned GNOME because they had to, because GNOME was bad. And then Plasma was right at the transition phase within like 2 years, because they announced they were going to transition to Plasma 5. So Canonical couldn't choose Plasma because Plasma 4 was going away, and they couldn't like release a whole new LTS approach and then have like the software completely changed 2 years later or 3 years later. So they couldn't use Plasma and they couldn't use GNOME, and Mate didn't exist. Cinnamon didn't exist. LXQt didn't exist. Basically nothing existed. Mate didn't exist. Anything like there was no options for them to choose except for XFCE.
Gone XFCE exactly, because.
But then XFCE is ancient. Like everything, ancient XFCE is still not GTK3, and it's been
but we're talking about the first GNOME 3 release, so it's long ago enough that it would have made sense, at least for the transition phase. They could have done pretty much the same thing that they've done with Unity with XFCE. Probably they would have jumped to Mate when that started.
But Mate also took like 6-7 years before it got GTK3 fully. So every option was
Yeah.
like there was not a good option that Canonical had,
Well,
and I
I
think
would
that
have still
them.
gone with GTK two, but because
I
because
don't. I think GTK two was the problem with GTK two is that one, it wasn't good, and two, it was deprecated. So shipping production quality or production systems and software distributions and stuff for something that is no longer being maintained by the people who made it, like that's a bad.
they did that with
Do what?
with Compass. So what's the difference?
Well, they maintained it. No, they maintained Compass.
They could have
I would
maintained
agree that Compass is
GTK
not the
two.
best option.
They could have
No, no, no.
maintained GTK two or whatever
But
else.
but that would be going back in time, and rather than just embracing what's coming. And I think that they shouldn't have used GTK3 anyway. I think they should have used Qt because well, here's the thing that they did use Qt. The 12.04 version of Unity had both a GTK version and a Qt version, and the Qt version was lighter, faster, cleaner, and just a better experience. And then they broke it and abandoned it, and then they did it again in like 14.04, and they abandoned it again. And then they announced they were going to use Unity 8, which is going to be cute. So they eventually were like, yeah, but then they found out that if they would have just stuck with it in 2004 or 2012, I mean, they would have already had a solution and basically they would have dominated. But they wanted to stick with the whole GTK side. They wanted to stick to the GNOME stuff, and it's like I don't know why. So that's why I'm saying like the entire situation that Canonical had, they made a bad decision, sure, in a way, but they also didn't have a good decision to make. So
that's a fair point. That's a fair point.
Yeah.
But to respond to your criticism of staying with GTK, I think that GTK is actually a better option than Qt for some things. I think that
such as
having a more coherent and simple desktop. Not that you cannot have that with Qt, but having developed with GTK, especially recently, and having tried, even though it was kind of a long time ago, to develop with Qt, I can tell you that if you're trying to make something on the same page of like an Android app to make an example to set a baseline, I think that GTK is more suited for it, mostly because it kind of I don't want to say forces you, but it kind of puts you in a certain mindset of doing things in a certain way. While Qt, on the other hand, first it's many people actually like to use Python with Qt, but I find that using C++ is like the right way to use Qt. And using C++ by itself is a long process, and it requires a lot of work, and I don't know where I'm going with this. The point is that Qt, yeah, sorry. The point is that Qt, for how it works, for how it works for the developer, how it's laid out for the developer, it kind of makes you do more Windowsy like stuff in a way.
I mean, it's open to like interpretation of however you use Qt, because Qt Creator allows you to use the UI however you want to do it. So people do default to Windows in some cases, but you could really do whatever you want. You could do CSDs in Qt if you wanted to.
Of course. I mean, there are some cases where people have done that, and even like a nice Qt app that I really like is Telegram Desktop.
Yeah, exactly. Very, very streamlined and really nice design and everything, but it also is it's a lean approach too, because they were able to use Qt and also have the biggest benefit. Let's just go back to one thing: GTK on Android. How does that work? How efficient is that? It doesn't. Okay, now GTK on Windows. How well does that work?
Just use a VM if you need to do that.
Okay. GTK on Mac, how well does that work?
Probably the same thing.
Okay, so the answer is Qt is better because Qt works on all of those cross-platform, and they build all the same. It's totally fine. You can do it in Qt. You can't do it in GTK. Yes, GTK works in Windows.
You do have a fair point, but How well does an Android app work on Linux, Windows, Mac OS, or anything that is not Android?
Well, Android is a different issue because
Well,
like
iOS is
it just makes it
iOS is the same
easier.
thing.
It makes it easier to use uh, Qt because you can not have to learn a new UI for the Android.
No,
You
no,
don't have to
no. I
learn a
mean
new.
the other way around. How does an Android like Kotlin or Java application work on Linux, Windows, or Mac OS? It doesn't.
Well, that's true, but I'm saying like, well, with the Andbox you kind of can. But I'm just saying like the
Doesn't really
UI
count.
when you're developing something for what's for having compatibility with Android and desktop, it's easier to use Qt because you only have to use one toolkit. You only have to learn one toolkit. Whereas if you use GTK, you have to use different. You have to use GTK on Linux and then something else on Windows, or a very old version of GTK on Windows, and then completely something different on Mac and then something different on Android. Whereas
Well,
whereas
yeah,
Qt,
that's not really what I was trying to say. You're completely right. I completely agree with you that there's not much to even discuss about that because Qt really runs everywhere. And actually, some time ago, I for a job offer that at the end of the day I just refused. They wanted to use Xamarin for a cross-platform application, and I just tried to convince them to use Qt because even if I don't really like it too much, I recognized its technical merits. And of course, if you need to do something that's really cross-platform, like for instance, we're using OBS right now. OBS works on every platform, also because it's written with Qt.
right?
And that's a very fair and very good point. But what I'm trying to say is another thing. One, I think a Qt app by itself doesn't really have a brand identity.
That's true. Yeah, you
Okay.
could, the developer chooses what they want. Yeah.
Okay. And two, um, it doesn't really matter what toolkit you're using if you're targeting one platform. So as for Android applications, that's what I was talking about before. Android applications just target Android. They don't work anywhere else except maybe Chrome OS, but that doesn't really count. And in the same way, it doesn't really matter if GTK only works well in Linux, because if you're writing a Linux application, what should you care?
I think it does matter because the majority of I think it matters only because of one thing is that the most people who use it are not using Linux, and we want them to use Linux, and we want developers to come to make stuff for Linux, and to make them learn GTK would be backwards because they'd have to learn a whole new thing that's completely irrelevant to what they already know. But if they use Qt, then they don't have to learn anything new. They already know Qt. So I think Qt overall is the better toolkit even for Linux because of that transitional phase for developers, making it a lot easier.
Honestly, again, you're right. There's no way you're wrong. And okay, no, I wasn't saying you were wrong at any point, but that's
Right.
not really the point that I'm trying to make, because we're trying to build a platform. We're trying to build a coherent, consistent experience with a brand identity, with a certain look, with a certain user experience. GTK.
Okay, let's take for example GTK on Elementary. GTK apps on Elementary don't
Blame
look
Elementary.
anything like GTK apps on.
Honestly, blame Elementary, because they are not open to anything. They want to use GTK because they like GTK for the same reasons that I do, but they want to interpret their own particular way. I really love what the Elementary guys are doing. They're great. They're doing a great job. I don't want to say anything bad on them, but they just cannot accept what GTK standards are. And that's
So yeah, they created their own human interface guidelines as well. Yeah, so it's they're very different. I'm just saying, like, if we're going to choose something that's let's say if we're going to choose a toolkit to suggest to developers, I think that the best option is Qt because of the cross-platform, because of the transitioning benefits, and even though it doesn't really have any kind of branding suggestions or whatever, GTK also has contradictions in itself. So at the same time, like, while I agree that the CSD approach to GTK looks really good, I think that because because GNOME has a contradict or not contradicts, but no one can agree what GNOME should look like by default, or no one can agree what GTK apps should look like by default. So even though they do have that kind of a guideline thing, it's not really adhered to most of the time.
I think we need more work towards that in our community, because that's something we could really benefit a lot from. Particularly, again, for the brand identity, I think that's something that's really important. It works on Android,
Oh yeah, I
it
agree.
works on iOS. It has worked on the whole Universal Windows platform thing, and I think we need that too on GNOME. And I'm not gonna. I don't want to say we don't need. We have to not use Qt, because at the end of the day, you can make a Qt app that looks just like a GTK app. But we just need a consistent UX design guideline.
I agree with that. We should if we could have a cohesive experience as far as the apps go, and everybody just agrees on at least on a basic standard level of how things should be laid out in Linux. I think that would be beneficial. So I think what we're trying to the takeaway from this particular thing is that Electron is the future.
No, why? Why do you say that?
just to mess with you.
That was bad. All right, let's just pretend you didn't say anything.
Okay, let's just move on.
All right, so I just wanted to see if there was anything in the chat. Oh my god, we completely ignored the chat. But I just wanted to read through it really quickly, because I saw that there were some people asking stuff. Okay, the Lemon Linux says that he installed Linux Mint on his dad's laptop and he loves Cinnamon because it reminded him of Windows, and that's just what we were talking about, and that's actually, again, a testament to how familiar interfaces are actually useful. And maybe down the road he will possibly want to try something new, or something more that's more different from Windows, from the Windows experience. And maybe he could try either GNOME or Plasma, and like those, and have a better workflow, because at the end of the day, that's about that what matters, to have a productive workflow. Some people don't even like i3 for that.
I don't think he's going to switch to i3, but maybe.
No.
Who knows?
Oh, well, you know what? I think some people are really more keen towards tiling window managers, and I think I've heard some time ago that some people with some like motor disabilities like used i3 because they could interact with the computer like better using like those assistive input devices.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. I mean, as far as if you're like blind users, I think there's a lot of support for i3 or any tiling window manager, because it's just like the most basic amount of access to the text, so you don't have to worry about all the toolkits that are encapsulating everything.
Exactly.
That might be much more beneficial. I'm kind of curious if there would be, I know there's a couple distributions that have i3 that are like. I'm curious if there was ever, if any distribution exists that is i3 specific for accessibility. It doesn't have to be i3, just anything that's tiling, just to see how that would work.
I wouldn't be
because
surprised,
if that,
to be honest.
Yeah, I think there's a couple that are i3 based, but I don't know if there would be that kind of situation, because like if someone's blind, i3 could benefit them in that situation, but like you need a base that's also like easy to maintain, not because it would take a lot longer to maintain it. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, just a thought.
Yeah, sure. Something else he said is he hates that you have to have a password, but he told him that he'll be doing. He will need a password if. Okay.
Yeah, what he has to do, he doesn't need a password to do it, so he has to worry about having the password. Yeah.
All
I mean
right.
that there's our situations where that's an interesting point. Like it goes to what I was talking about earlier about when certain users I've given Linux to, they don't even know their password, what it even is, because they don't need to do anything, because I'll remote in and update it or something like that. Um, so like, and if they do, you could just have like they are suggesting having like I wouldn't put a password text file on your desktop for them, but something might be easier to like have like a password manager available,
What I
like
tend to do,
Bitwarden
yeah.
application or something.
What I tend to do is when I'm setting up a new computer, I usually for a friend or something, I usually write down the password that I chose for them, that I generated for them, in a like a post-it and stick it to their wrist rest of the laptop, and just tell
Mhm.
them if you keep putting it in, then, at some point you will just remember it, and everyone that I've done this with has ever. It's always worked. People tend
Okay.
to remember what they just have to copy day and night. So
Yeah, I agree. Like, and that's what I say for people who like want to do a password manager. Like, that's what you like. If you do a password manager, make sure that your master password is something that you repeatedly put in before you actually start saving it to the auto login. Because otherwise, if you don't remember the master password, you're totally screwed. So, yeah,
as for password managers, I usually suggest a combination of KeePass and Nextcloud or some similar service, because I think it's simple enough and it works a lot better than it sounds.
I agree that that's actually a good option, but I think I prefer Bitwarden because it is self-hostable and you can
Sure.
still have all the benefits of that. But at the same time, it also gives you like a lot of beneficial like niceties of having an Android app, for example, that syncs to your server and stuff.
Sure. And well, what I do is I have like this KeePass file that's synchronized through my Nextcloud instance,
Mm-hmm.
and I just have this file that's automatically moving around using Nextcloud, and I have it on my phone and on my all my computers. It's just it's the best thing ever. Even for myself, it's been a while since I've been using it, and it's made my life so much easier.
Makes sense.
Anyway, managing password is always a difficult task. It's tedious, to say
Yeah.
the least.
Yeah, very true.
Next on, we have Layrate saying that his ThinkPad T440S sucks with Mint Cinnamon. On web is low and hangs on YouTube, but test XFC or GNOME 330 maybe will be better. So as for slow YouTube, that's kind of it's weird. Okay, YouTube sucks because most of the videos that they deliver are WebM, and WebM, as far as I know, doesn't have a hardware decoder at all.
Mm-hmm.
So all of the videos that you stream are actually decoded by your CPU, and if your CPU is under load or is not strong enough, it's not going to be a good experience. And also, the thing about YouTube is that and not using hardware decoding, it sucks your battery life a lot faster. And a solution for that is using what I found is using MPV to actually play YouTube videos. And there is this extension. Actually, I don't remember it off the top of my head. Let me just search for it real quick. It's an extension for Firefox called Play With, and you just right click on a video and select the Play With option. The first time you're going to do it, it's going to tell you that it's going to download an M3U file, and you have to tell it to open it by default with MPV or GNOME MPV if you prefer that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and from then on, you're just gonna be able to play YouTube videos directly from MPV with a right click, and that's a lot better.
Does that extension support the MPV like easily, quickly? Do you have to set up? Do you have to like put a command in or anything, or just like
Oh
give it?
no, no,
Is
you
it
just have to you
clicking?
just have to have installed in your system both MPV and YouTube DL, because MPV actually uses YouTube DL as
Right,
a backend, and
but it's on
it's
the extension
automatic.
side. It's just point and click.
Yeah, it's point and click.
Nice. I mean, I was going to suggest open with, which is basically very similar, but it allows you to open with like literally any application, but it does require you to
Yeah,
know
same
like
thing.
the structure.
Same thing, but as far as I know,
Play,
MPV with YouTube DL is the easiest thing to play YouTube videos.
yeah. I use MPV all the time. I love MPV. I think that's the best media player, just period, for Linux. More so than VLC by far.
Yeah, VLC is
But
more
yeah,
user friendly in a way, but MPV is
yeah,
fine.
kinda, totally. I mean, okay, totally. Most of the keyboard shortcuts on MPV are weird, but I think that MPV is better. But I do agree it's easier to use VLC. But play with sounds interesting, so I'm gonna check that out because I have open with, but play with sounds like a much simpler solution.
Yeah, it's even very simple because it just downloads a playlist file and you tell it to open it with MPV, and it's a temporary file. It's not even on your hard drive taking up space.
Nice.
Yeah. Next on, let's see. Glamolink suggests trying SFC for this problem. Again, it could help because Cinnamon is a compositing window manager. Muffin is a compositing window manager. SFC by default doesn't do compositing, so it could be better, but at the same time, doesn't really solve the problem.
Right. Well, even then, if you have if depending on your hardware, Cinnamon is a single threaded system anyway, so it might be like kind of using a lot of the resources. Where if you used XFCE, you have to worry about that.
Yeah.
So it's another reason why.
It's a more modular D, so in a way.
Yep. Someone's suggesting Peppermint as an option or MX Linux. I agree. Both of those are good options.
Yeah. Furnace notes that Peppermint doesn't support direct upgrades without whole reinstalls. That's an interesting choice. I don't. Well, I see where they're coming from because version upgrades are tough to support even.
Yeah, Peppermint supports updates. They don't support LTS to LTS updates because Peppermint's based on LTSs. So if you want to go from like the big release of Peppermint to the next big release of Peppermint, I think you do have to do a fresh install for that.
Makes sense.
It's kind of the similar thing that Linux Mint does because Linux Mint suggests to do that too.
Yeah. The good old, by the way, use Archmin. Sure.
Yep.
You couldn't miss that.
But I think that has to be in like every video that you.
It's not even really a meme.
That's the spirit. It's just reality, right?
Someone comments and says gaming on Arch works just fine. That's my point. Not the other.
I mean, gaming on Arch is fine, sure.
Yeah.
There's a lot of nuance to what the best distro is, which is interesting because you wanted to talk about this particular topic because it's like there's so much nuance to it that it's hard to choose, right? But there are many different ways to specify, and like as long as you break it down to like here are these different scenarios, then it's a lot easier to choose which one is the best.
Yeah, I mean that's probably the only reasonable way to do that.
Rogue Network is asking something interesting. What is the best all-around IDE that you? He says, I find myself going back to Mac OS to run and test code that I'm writing in Swift.
That's a tough question for me personally because I use Vim.
That is an interesting situation there.
Yeah. And okay, Swift.
Yeah. Well, Swift is hard because Swift is technically open, but there's not any stuff that's supporting that on Linux. Like you can't compile Swift on Linux, I don't think. Even though it's technically open.
You can compile things that probably use Cocoa or what's the other thing? I think it's Cocoa, the macOS / iOS framework for the toolkit thing. I don't know. Swift, I think that command line stuff, backend stuff, you can do pretty much whatever on Linux. Okay, yeah. As far as IDEs, I don't really suggest you use an IDE if you can avoid it. Although I know that there are some languages that kind of require you to use an IDE. For instance, Java, it's not really bearable without an IDE. So in that case, A nice ID is Eclipse, but it's kind of an oldish. So if you don't like that, I really suggest you.
NetBeans.
Yeah, NetBeans is another solution. I prefer Eclipse myself. Or maybe look at what JetBrains does for that particular language. Because JetBrains IDs, there are premium versions of them, but they tend to be very good if you need an IDE. So maybe try that.
Yeah, but text editors, for the win.
Yeah, text editors are more practical because you use them for everything, and if you have a proper plugin structure for them, they tend to work very well. I mean, Vim works well. Atom is not really too great because it tends to break very easily. Yeah, because it has its own package manager, and packages get updated in a weird way. It doesn't really work too well. VS Code, I've heard wonders of it. I don't really like the fact that it's being developed by Microsoft, and I don't really need an Electron app to write code, so just use Vim myself.
Well, I mean, I use Sublime Text, which is a text editor that is proprietary, but not using Electron.
That's a fair point.
And yeah, I think that Sublime Text is a really good editor, and it has a lot of cool plugins available. And I think that if someone wanted to get into a text editor that gives you a lot of power, and but you wanted an easier like entry level, I think Sublime Text is probably the best option because by default it has a ton of really great features that you can do in Vim, but you have to set up all that stuff in Vim yourself or find a config that does it. So like once you get used to like maybe if you're not a programmer and you want to look into it, try with something that has like those kind of features, and then move on to Vim or Emacs if you want to.
I would never suggest Emacs. Why would you do that?
Just because I'm being nice to that community. Okay.
Nice
I actually don't like Emacs,
something.
but
Exactly. That's the point. Nice isn't something. No, really. If you like Emacs, I'm sorry. It's fine.
Yeah. If you like to have this weird contradiction between literally everything else using Control V for pasting and Emacs using it for page down, you can use whatever you want. Just go ahead.
Well, I use P for pasting.
Yeah, but that's the Vim way, right?
There are some people that use like Shift insert something to copy and paste. Shift Control insert. There's a weird combination with insert to copy and paste.
I do Shift insert actually.
Okay, you're the second person that I know that does this.
Well, it's mainly because if I'm doing something that I'm already like my right hand is not being used on a certain typing thing, that I'm already easily accessed there, whereas I'm maybe doing a different so Control A Shift insert or Control A Control C Control V, like you kind of do a weird little jump to get that to work. And I don't okay, I have no reason.
I'd rather use my right click menu.
Like I have no reason absolutely at all for why I use Shift insert, but I almost always do.
All right. It's kind of the same thing when I do like O and Enter in Vim because I want two new lines, and I'm pretty sure there's a proper way to do it. It's just that I don't want to dig into it. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of a good point. Like there's just maybe it's just like a muscle memory thing that I've developed.
Yeah, it's like a choreography you do with your fingers that relaxes you in a way. Yeah, it relaxes me when I do O enter and I don't mess up. Yeah, so.
That's true.
The Fernrest Dev asks, but what if awesome WM isn't awesome? Well, then it's probably i3.
Wait, are you saying i3 is not awesome?
Well, it's not awesome because it's i3.
Right, technically. That's such a. I think that name is so weird. There's a thing that I one of my things that makes me laugh about the open source community and the Linux community is the names of these packages and software that they give, and then sometimes they're like the laziest possible name ever, which is yet another insert whatever.
Do you know how I choose the names for my projects?
What?
Okay, I need to start these projects. MK dear. Okay, let's just put this in.
Just at random.
Yeah, I mean the first thing that comes to my mind, and I didn't even bother to change it.
That I mean, that's at least that makes more sense in the sense of like at least you put a little effort in versus no effort. Yet another system tool. That is the laziest name for anything.
But it's true. So why isn't it good? I mean, it's yet
because there's a lot of things that become the default, and yet its name is yet another. For example,
that's
YAD.
That's great.
No, YAD is a great tool, and its name is awful because yet another dialogue. But it's better than the other dialogue options. So it's like it's a terrible name because it's just automatically going like we have so little faith in our own software. We're going to call it yet another.
You see, what's the point? It doesn't really matter. This really shows how great people doing this software are, because they're probably doing it for themselves. They're not even bothering to choose a proper name, and then the whole thing goes boom and gets.
You don't have to choose a proper name. Just choose anything other than yet another. Is really
yet another is anything.
And I'm saying anything other than yet another. Just because that is just the worst. Like anything else, Yowert. That's actually I think Yowert is yet another or something.
Yeah, Yowert is yet another, and Yay is yet Yay is also a URL per.
Yeah, it's just
yet another.
Just stop saying yet another. Okay, just people stop doing that, making your apps just it's just ridiculous. And you could say they're like, well, I don't know what to call it. I'm going to make a podcast app. How about Banana Podcast? Literally anything, and it's better.
Yet another Banana Podcast, because Banana Podcast
yeah, because there's already a Banana Podcast.
Another. Now we have to start a podcast that's called Yet Another Banana Podcast.
Right?
Yeah, sure. We have.
We're going to talk about all the different types of bananas. There's tons of them.
Yeah, but aren't they all extinct?
No, there's actually there's actually like 100 that are there's a difference between wild bananas and then the bananas that are edible, that are reasonably edible. There's two types of bananas that are regular types that people eat, both of which are not wild, and one of them is not extinct, but it's very susceptible to pests, so it's essentially been replaced. That's called the Gros Michel banana. There's also another the current banana that we actually eat is called the Cavendish banana. And if you ever, this is a completely random tangent, but if you ever eat anything like a popsicle that has a flavor of banana that tastes nothing like a banana, it's because that tastes like it tastes like the Gros Michel banana.
Okay, this is the third time in my life in this, and it's been all in the same academic year, so to speak, that I've been unironically talking about bananas.
Right?
Yeah.
There you go. It happens.
And the last thing before today was yesterday, so...
The interesting timing. What's going on here?
I don't know.
Why is bananas becoming a topic?
I don't know. I really have no idea. That's weird. Let's move on.
Let's move on.
Dilemma Linux says he got a new laptop, so he's back on Windows 10. Oh, that's a bummer. He was having troubles with Win 10 on his old laptop. Then he was wanting something lighter than Cinnamon, so I installed the Max, and he loves that too. All right, that's great. Maybe this is the type of person that wants something working that is really simple. He doesn't need to think about it. So he hated. You have to create the password for links if you want to update. Oh, to put in a password probably is what he's trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't know if there's a good option for that. Either you are root all the time, and that's not really advisable.
That's not a good option. Well, the thing is about, and one of the things about Linux about being easy to use in that situation is you can make the password not very good. You don't have to be a really complicated password, as long as this person is doing the stuff that's like just updating the repo and they're not installing random software or whatever. More than and also because you need physical access to be able to, because like Linux is such a secure system that your password could be bad and it still be okay.
I know that there are some people that, yeah, because of the salting and all the stuff, that makes sense. But I know that there are some people that on some laptops you have those fingerprint sensors, and on some laptops they even work on Linux. That's bogus. And they can set it up to enter the sudo password, and that's actually a sudo module, and that's something I always wanted to try. Sounds really nice.
That's very cool. Also, another option for people who are willing to spend money is get one of those YubiKeys.
Yeah. No, I would approve.
He would.
Yeah.
So,
that's an option. You don't have to put in a password, but you still have a very secure way to authenticate to with your computer.
Yeah, totally. The Militant Penguin. Nice. What distro would be best for a Xeon-based system?
Okay, you have a Xeon-based system. If it's a desktop, weird. Okay, you're probably one of the people that. Okay, Wendell from Level 1 Techs suggests to buy Xeons for like old Xeons for desktop use, because they are pretty much good deals most of the time. If you're using it for desktop use, any desktop distro would do, because Xeons and mainstream Intel processors are not that different, really. If you're using that for, I don't know, any server use of sorts, then what we've already said about servers applies here. So Ubuntu LTS, if you want to do something more like snaps and stuff like that, or CentOS if you're just doing like web servers and appliance kind of stuff.
Yep, I agree.
Then Strong Flux says that my volume is too low. I'm sorry. I don't know if they're referring to mine or yours, but you are almost clipping.
Might be loud.
Yeah, you're very loud actually. Yeah, you have to reduce your volume. So I think the problem is me. This microphone is really terrible. I have to change it. If you want to help me change the microphone, you can do a super chat.
There you go. That's true.
Yeah, microphones are expensive, and I don't really want to buy a blue microphone because I hate those things. Still,
yeah,
I don't have many options.
You could get a Rock Band mic.
I'd rather just keep using this.
The weird thing is the Rock Band mic is actually a pretty phone. It has its own issues, but it's pretty solid for only like $25 or something.
There's actually a pretty nice like $40-$50 condenser microphone. Like Chris Titus Tech even made a review of it not long ago. Do you know Chris Titus?
Yeah, I've heard of him.
Yeah, it's pretty good. He's pretty new to Linux as well. Kind of like approaching the Linux world similarly to how Ryan did. It's nice to see like these people approaching Linux. And the nice thing is that he, for what I got, he actually uses Linux in his day job, like in servers and stuff. For what I understand, I don't want to say something that's not true, but anyway. And so he is not like coming to Linux like without knowing anything. Yeah, he's actually pretty skilled. But the weird thing is that he does things in the like as you would do them on the server. So he has a weird approach to desktop Linux, and I actually kind of like it. I actually learned a couple of things from him that I didn't know about Debian and stuff.
Interesting. So because he's on the server side first, he's like really in depth into that level as well when he's transitioning to the desktop.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah, it's a weird kind of forma mentis to start with the desktop Linux world.
Yeah, because you're going basically in the massive reverse.
yeah, that's very interesting. I actually like his channel a lot because of this.
Interesting. I'll check it out. Yeah, says Rogue Network also says, do any of you guys use fish shell or do you prefer bash?
All right, so the thing about the fish shell, it's very nice. The concept is great and it works pretty good as well, but I don't like that it's not POSIX compliant, because using AUR you have to run many scripts, and having a non-POSIX compliant shell makes most of the UART packages break. So I wouldn't suggest that if you're on Arch. If you're on Ubuntu, maybe, possibly, still not the greatest choice in the world. I myself prefer to use ZSH. It's not as easy. It's definitely more bloated, but the functionality is pretty much kind of the same, mostly.
Mm-hmm. I agree. That's a good point. I mean, Fish is working on making it more POSIX compliant. Like the latest release has improved a lot of their stuff, but it is still currently not fully. So I like it, but I also don't really have a preference. I don't really care. I use the commands as the commands and use bash scripts and whatever. So I don't really care. Bash is fine, whatever.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, Bash is fine. I use ZSH myself because I like having some more info. I made a video recently about this thing. There is some more info I can get with some ZSH themes, and that's something that I fancy. It's not
Sure.
essential. It's not essential. If I have to use Bash, in fact, I do use Bash on my servers. There's no problem with that.
Yep, I agree.
Anyway, I think we're pretty much answered to all of the chat questions. Is there anyone still online? Yeah, we have 14 people live. That's great.
Yep. Nice.
All right, so I think this is going to wrap it up for this video. What do you think, Michael?
Yeah, sounds good to me.
All right, so thank you for joining me, Michael. And let me do the outro thing. This is gonna wrap it up for this video, guys. Thank you very much for watching. I do appreciate it. If you like this video, please make sure to press the thumbs up button down there, and also remember to subscribe to my channel, as well as to Michael's channel, TuxDigital, and as well as Destination Linux. The Destination Linux podcast is like one of the best things I can listen to especially when I commute. The day that Destination Linux comes out is great because I can just wake up and turn on my my podcast manager and start listening to my morning Destination Linux. It's a great thing.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, thank you for participating into the podcast. It's really great. And so subscribe to my channel, subscribe to Michael's channel, subscribe to Destination Linux. You'll find all the links in the description. And I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you again, Michael, for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.